Okay, next up is clothing. And this was one of those things that's extremely variable. I'm just going to let you know what I wore, what I changed, why I changed it, and you could use your opinion. This is one of those things that's extremely variable. Everybody had different ideas. So when I was researching, wool was my direction that I went to. So I ended up starting, for pants-wise, with a pair of wool pants. And they're like dress pants that I got from an Army Navy surplus store. They were pretty light, but still they're wool pants. And I was expecting cold weather when I started on March 8th, but I ended up getting nice weather. So I ended up getting rid of these really early because they were too much. Even when I didn't have thermals on or anything like that, they were still too warm. I was just sweating profusely, which turned out to be a trend. So wool pants, not very good. So I switched to regular zip-off pants, regular hiking pants. I don't know what I did with them. They're around here somewhere. Can't help you there. I wore them for a long period of time. I wore them all the way through the Smokies and into Virginia. And the issue I had with them is they didn't cool very well. They were fine in the colder weather when it was still a little chilly and you wanted long pants, but when I ended up zipping off the legs, it probably only came to right above my knee, and there wasn't a whole lot of air circulation there. And again, I sweated a lot, so I wanted more circulation, so I didn't necessarily like them. So I went to the next kind of short, which was $3 from the thrift store. It's like soccer shorts, and they're pretty short. I think they came up to my thigh, and I really liked them for a long period of time. But it turned out I wanted even cooler shorts. I wore these from Virginia all the way up into Vermont. So these lasted me a long time. So these were pretty good, comfortable, not so revealing, but in Vermont, I ended up getting running shorts, which if I were to start from the beginning again, I would start with these from the beginning. It's got a liner on the inside, and it's black, so you know, if you're, for some reason, your leg rolls up or something like this, it doesn't look really awkward, you know, if something's hanging out. I loved them, absolutely loved them. They were really short. They came up to really high on my thigh. For me, they were cut up high on the side as well, so there's a ton of ventilation in there. Still sweated, but it dried really quick and it kept me really cool. Loved them. I even, on Katahdin at the end, I wore my thermals underneath them, and I think that probably was the best system. You know, unless it was raining for some reason and you didn't want to get your thermals wet, the shorts would have been perfect from the beginning, from the get-go. Again, it was an evolution of what I was comfortable wearing. You know, and the further along I got, the shorter my shorts got. And again, if I would do it all over, I would start with the running shorts, the little booty shorts. Super comfortable, loved them. Shirt-wise, this is the shirt I started with. It had a collar and it had sleeves to begin with, just like a regular t-shirt. It is wool. This is the thing that I would definitely recommend starting and ending with, is a wool shirt. I got the really light one because it would dry really quick. This shirt was awesome. It lasted the entire trip, and it's probably on its last leg. But the fact that it lasted 6 months, 2,100 miles, is amazing. Sweat out in it, and I sweated profusely. It would dry damn quick. You know, obviously cotton, if you don't know already, cotton is a big no-no in the outdoor world just because it holds onto the moisture and it'll sap the heat out of your body. The most important thing is when you are wet, that you have the ability to stay warm again. Love the t-shirt, loved it. What I don't have out here, which is important as well, is your base layer, which is your long sleeve thermals, your long sleeve bottoms. I carried them the entire trip. There wasn't a portion that I didn't carry them because they were light enough, and I figured I'd rather have them in an emergency situation for any reason if I got wetted out and the temperature dropped, I always had a spare pair of dry clothing to put on. A lot of times I wore them for my sleep clothes. They were wool. I think it was an off-brand Kenyan or something like that. I also had a pair of Smart Wools in reserve, just in case I didn't carry. Thermal's awesome, pretty straightforward. I carried this jacket in the beginning, and I used it for really cold weather and when I would stop. A lot of times you would start hiking in the morning and it was cold, and as you stopped for a break or the end of the day, your body was warm, and when it would cool off, you would start getting a chill. So I put this jacket on, and it was able to regulate my temperature a little bit. It's wool, it's a little heavy. If I did it again, I don't know if I would carry it. I think I would rather just have maybe a long sleeve shirt, and I would use my raincoat to keep the warmth in. To have like a raincoat windbreaker combo, that seemed to be the better option. Takes up less room. Still, I love the jacket. I'll wear it forever. I brought a scarf in the beginning, just something extra, because I was preparing for really cold weather in March, and it never really happened. I wore it once that I can remember, which was in Virginia or Tennessee again, on Roan High Knob. Froze my ass off, had every piece of clothing that I owned on. So scarf. I also had wool gloves, which are somewhere, who the hell knows where they went. I used them maybe 4 or 5 days, 6 days maybe, out of the entire trip. I carried them for probably a couple months before I realized I really could do without them. Also in the beginning, I had a down vest, which it weighs less than a pound. The big issue, it took up a ton of room. And I carried this in the beginning with everything else because I was afraid that I was going to be too cold. When I did bring it, and I did use it, was in the whites. I made the decision, instead of carrying the wool jacket, I was going to carry the down vest for extra cold weather. So when I went from Mitzvah Hut all the way over Mount Washington to Madison Hut, I had really bad weather in the beginning. It was all clouded in, it was super windy, super cold. I had everything on again. I didn't have my thermal pant bottoms on. So you ended up your legs staying warmer than you thought they needed to. Socks, super important. Wool socks. I was a wool nut. I used 3 pairs the entire trip. Never had to replace them. They're a little worn out, but I think it's pretty impressive that these lasted the entire trip. Basically, I rotated 2 pairs as my hiking socks, and I had a 3rd pair that I only used for sleeping in. So I always had something clean to put on my feet at the end of the day. Loved them. They were great. Smart Wool. I think this pair is Smart Wool, but I bought it at an Army Navy store, and they just put a tag over the Smart Wool. But awesome. I got about a mid-weight sock. There's like the mid-weight, lightweight, and heavyweight, and it's kind of the thickness of the sock. And the reason I used a thicker sock is because I had a really thin shoe. Shoes. This is something that I made a decision with early on, that I wanted a very minimalist shoe because I wanted my foot to experience the trail just like the rest of my body was. I didn't want like the ski boot mentality where your foot's not getting a whole lot of flex and a whole lot of rotation, that the bigger, thicker boots, even some of the trail runners, were too stiff than what I wanted. So I started with the Merrell Barefoot shoe. This is the Tough Glove. It's all leather. I bought it about a year prior to starting, and I would walk around it and I would do all my practice hikes in to really kind of build up strength in my calf and my ankles. If you run in them, you're gonna feel it. You can't hit your heel on the ground because it actually hurts. And I think that was a good mentality to start getting in, because if you research it a little bit, they talk about how you're not really supposed to bang your heel on the ground anyway. It sends all the shock absorbing right up to your knee, to your back, to your hips, You're supposed to use your foot and your calf as a shock absorber. So that has a lot to do with what you're willing to deal with. I ended up, hitting the majority of my weight on the middle of my foot or a little bit further forward, and you could see on the wear pattern of my shoe is I ended up wearing this part out almost completely while the heel is barely even touched. Even on the downhills, that's what hit first, that would hit, and the heel would be like a shock absorber, and occasionally, obviously, it would hit the ground. You don't think about it after a while, but if you start in the beginning, thinking about what you're doing, you can build the muscle memory, and eventually your body does it naturally. So I loved these shoes. Loved them, loved them, loved them. The only issue is Merrell stopped making the all-leather one, and I wore out my third pair, and I had to buy a material one, which I didn't like nearly as much. It didn't stretch like the leather does, so when my foot would get a little moist or something like that and it would swell a little, the leather would go with it, while the material ones wouldn't give it all. Just so you know, I didn't get a single blister on the entire trip. Amazing. I saw people who had their feet look like raw meat. They were so beat up, covered in blisters. They had tape all over them, nails that were falling off. So it's your own choice. I would suggest start building the strength in your feet now. Everything's going to hurt anyway. My knees ended up hurting in the beginning. My calves were cramping. I think it was all just from inactivity. I don't think it was the shoe choice. Your feet are going to hurt at the end of the day, especially in Pennsylvania, dealing with the rocks. Even up in the northern states, New Hampshire and Maine, ton of rocks up there as well. They're a little different, but 10, 12 hours of walking, your feet are going to hurt. From what I got from other people, mine didn't hurt any more than anyone else's. So, something to think about. Your footwear, it's everything. You've got to take care of your feet. And I would think the fact that I didn't get any blisters with this shoe means something in my mind. So, let me do rain gear before I go. We'll start with what I began with, which was a poncho. I had this brilliant idea that I was going to use my poncho as both my raincoat and my pack cover. So I bought a poncho. It didn't have a zipper in the front, so I cut it down the middle and I sewed a zipper in, which is fun doing building your own gear or modifying your own gear. But when you fail at something, you feel like an idiot because it didn't work. Whatever, it's tough. Poncho didn't work. I wore it for the first couple days, and when it rained, the sleeves ended up getting wet. I ended up getting wet on the inside, and if I had to take my backpack off, I ended up having to take my entire raincoat off in order to get to it. It didn't make a whole lot of sense. It just would get hung up in the cover that was around the back. Sucks. It seemed like a great idea, but ultimately it didn't work out that well. So when I was still in Georgia, in Hiawassee, I ended up buying a raincoat and using the raincoat and the pack cover combination. Great choice because, oh God, it smells terrible. So it was super lightweight, and I ended up using it like I use my wool coat to keep the warmth in. Now the issue with rain, this is important in my mind, is when you're dealing with warmer weathers where you're not worried about being wet underneath, your raincoat is not to keep you dry, it's to keep warmth in. A lot of times the temperature drops when it starts raining and you'll start feeling a chill. You don't want to keep getting colder and colder and colder, put the raincoat on. The raincoat's going to keep the moisture in, it's also going to keep the heat in. You can close the wrist straps, zip it up, whatever you got to do, you can start regulating your temperature with that. But you're going to sweat, at least me, I constantly was sweating. And it's more about heat retention than it is about staying dry. Now when it was really, really cold, it was about staying dry, and it was more important regulating your temperature, taking the raincoat off even if you were going to start sweating, because you never wanted to end wet on a really cold day, and I'm talking like freezing temperatures. It's more important to stay dry at that point so you can slow down, start shedding layers before the sweat builds, and you'll be surprised at how cool your body actually, or how quick your body actually cools down once you start shedding layers in the really cold weather. Rain cover for the backpack, and I'll actually talk about the liner now too. This was just to keep the backpack dry and keep some of the moisture off the other stuff. Keeping things dry, in my mind again, was really important to keep my sleeping bag dry, to keep my extra clothes dry. Used redundancy. So your backpack is going to do a little bit, but it's not waterproof by any means. So then the inside, I had a trash compactor bag that everything I wanted to stay dry was in here. So I put my sleeping bag in first, which was in a dry sack. So I put my sleeping bag in the dry sack, put the dry sack in the trash compactor bag, put it in my backpack, and when it would rain, I'd put the pack cover on. Never had an issue with it getting wet when it was in my backpack. I would keep my sleeping bag, my sleeping pad, my clothes bag, and if I had a jacket or something like the wool jacket, I would put that in there as well. A lot of times I kept my food bag, I would roll this up and put the food bag on top because it ended up getting wet constantly anyway. If you were hanging it up in a tree or in a bear line, the bear poles or whatever, and it rained overnight, it got wet anyway. So you had to kind of be careful with what you picked and put in your food bags anyway. So that's the clothes, rain gear, shoes. Any questions, please leave a comment, email me something, and I'll try and answer it as best as I can. This thing smells horrible. So next up, we will do food. So if you're interested, stay tuned.